So in our morning devotionals last week, there was a writing that had an image of a rabbi, a teacher, taking a scroll and reading its contents to his student. The author who wrote that devotional noted that the scroll itself was a metaphor for our lives. We can know everything that has already happened, and we can see what is happening now, and we might even be able to take a good guess at what comes next. But the only way to know for sure what comes next is to unroll the scroll a bit further. I'm not positive what exact point the writer made about that, because as soon as I heard that analogy, I went off into my own world of thought. The first thing I thought about was all of the people who have been predictors and made predictions about me in my life. I've had teachers and coaches and leaders of different kinds who believed that I was going to go forward and do amazing things in life. I remember an MYF, that's Methodist Youth Fellowship leader, who unexpectedly hugged me one Sunday evening when I arrived at church. I was, as always, the first one to arrive. When I got there, she rushed at me, threw a big hug on me, and said something like, "Steve, you're always on time. You are so much more mature and thoughtful than the kids who just wander in when they feel like it. I know you're going to do great things in life." I remember two things about that. One, I really wish she wouldn't hug me. And two, I was thinking she was goofy. Being on time is nice, and it probably helps in some situations, but even when I was a kid, I knew it's hardly a predictor of who is going to go on and do great things. Many of the best people that I have known have had what I would politely call on-time issues, so much so that I have learned to repeat a bit of wisdom about being late when they are late, and that is, if you're going to be late, be worth the wait. Saying this to people who are perpetually late helps me remember that person's value is not determined, in fact, by their timeliness, but by what they input when they're with me. Which reminds me that you can't really tell what's going to be contained in the future of someone's life by their habit of being late or on time. My youth group leader was imagining that a lifetime of punctuality would lead to greatness, but I knew even then there's no causal link between success and timeliness. There were others who looked at less lovely qualities in me and decided that I would never amount to anything, and they seemed to really enjoy telling me that. I got in big trouble in high school when a wrestling coach got angry at my brother. My brother had missed several weeks of practice because he had a severely sprained ankle, and I just happened to walk by while the coach was dressing him down. The coach told him that he was a has-been. He was a junior in high school. He was a has-been, and he would never amount to anything. He was mad at Dennis for taking so long to heal from his ankle sprain. I overheard him saying that to my brother, and as was my wont for a long time, I decided Dennis needed me to defend him. So, since I was in a surly mood, I told the coach then and there that I thought Dennis would probably amount to being more than a second-rate wrestling coach at a high school in a godforsaken place like Wyoming. That was wrong, as I was to find out. It was cruel, and I wish now that I hadn't said it. But I didn't. I felt compelled to say it out loud, and it pretty much ended my wrestling career. At the meeting that they called to talk about my attitude the next day, the head wrestling coach and the principal and the coach who had dressed Dennis down all agreed that with my attitude, I was doomed to a life of failure and misery. They told me their predictions with some glee. Happily, they decided not to hug me while they were doing that. My reaction was the same. I was pretty sure that some people would call sticking up for your brother exactly what winners were supposed to do. I was also pretty sure that my attitude was not as demeaning or immature as the wrestling coach who was yelling at a junior in high school because he had a sprained ankle. So I decided not to take their dire predictions about my life being a waste too seriously and just kept rolling along. I figured I would unroll the scroll and find out what the future held. I wouldn't take their word for it. And that's how it's been in my life. People making predictions as if they had been able to see the future, and me doubting that they really knew what they were talking about. And the slow unfolding of the scroll of my life very frequently surprising everyone in both delightful and sometimes not so delightful ways. These things ought to sound right to each one of you also. Predicting is going to happen in our lives based on what has happened or is happening now, even though it's a risky business to be in the prediction business. Because the stories of our lives have some crazy twists and turns that no one can see coming, it really is crazy to try to figure out what's going to happen. It's important for us to keep that truth in the forefront of our minds. For example, the coach and the principal were right about my attitude causing problems. Good Lord, I've had my share of difficulties owing to my attitude. Some of those problems grew even worse because my attitude also grew worse when people got mad at me for being stubborn, and around it went. They didn't like me because I was stubborn, which made me even more stubborn, which made them like me even less, and you know where that ends. It gets worse and worse. And then, when everybody least expected it in my life, a true twist occurred in that plot. My bad attitude led to my being ridiculed and mocked and attacked. And those things led me to a breaking point where I finally had to find relief from the pain that they caused and I caused. And that relief came from Christ, giving me the power to change my attitude about the people who were actually doing the hurting. No one could have seen that coming. No one would have predicted it, least of all me. But my bad attitude ended up leading to a forgiving attitude, which led me to think and react more kindly to others, which radically improved the quality of my life. So my bad attitude, when I finally presented it to Christ, was the leaven for an amazing grace in my life. No one predicted that. Who knew? Certainly not me or any of the people who were throwing guesses around about what I might be worth someday. I hope you will hang on to that little tidbit the next time someone is telling you how awful you are. It could just be that they are right about how you are, but they don't have any idea about how you're going to turn out. And that is called hope. And hope is one of the best gifts that Christ gives. The other thing I realized about the image of our lives being like the slow unrolling of the scroll was that we have no idea if the writing on the scroll goes clear to the end of the scroll, or if the scrolls we are unrolling end halfway down, and then there are pretty pictures or just blank space. You can't know until we actually get to the end of our scrolls. Personally, I'm hoping that my scroll ends with some beautiful haiku poem about Jesus and Marilyn, because they're the two best things in life. But I don't know. I don't know how it will end. I have to read one line at a time, just like you do. Thinking about the truth that it ends when it ends and not when we want it to, or even when we predict it ends, also drove home a powerful reminder. Since we can't control the future, we probably ought to quit trying to and spend our energy in living as fully as we can in the here and now. It doesn't matter so much how things finally end up, with a haiku or a star in the Wrestling Hall of Fame or a surprisingly short end. But it does matter that we take the time to make the best of the here and now. I think there's one more sentence. Let's see. Yep. With that in mind, I sat down with my coffee, held Marilyn's hand, prayed over breakfast, and then made sure to tell her how much I love being with her. I don't remember anyone predicting ever that I would end up being so content and happy and happily married in my life. I guess they just couldn't see it. Even though I have just explained why you should not try to make predictions about yourself or others, I am willing to make one prediction about whatever lies ahead in my scroll and your scroll too. And that prediction is that if we keep reading what emerges in our scrolls with a fundamental belief that Jesus is going to write the story that lies beyond the ending, we'll likely be just fine with whatever lies ahead, because we know that when the scroll is ended here, our lives are just beginning with Him. And I predict that living with Jesus for eternity will make all of us happy and content. Amen.